Revival is one thing, but awakening is a whole new different category, Sandra King. Tell us what we need to know about the Hamilton Great Awakening.
So basically, a revival is a compact time, just a one-time event where massive amounts of converts come and become Christians, right? An awakening is a longer extended revival where other revivals connect into it, and it usually travels maybe around the world or encompassing a larger, greater area. And so that's what's so important about our stories today about the Hamilton area, is because it started with a revival that also helped trigger the Second Great Awakening that went around the world.
And often America claims the Second Great Awakening, but you believe Phoebe Palmer, who preached here in this campground, was
Yes.
a critical part of it, an American celebrity, doctor's wife.
Yeah.
Tell us what Phoebe might have been like.
Well, I think she was a very personable woman. She was sold out for God. She tried to do everything in her life to honor God in everything she did. She was groundbreaking for women in ministry. She started orphanages. She was one of the first women, I think, to visit prisons at that time. She just had a passion for God. And her husband, Walter Palmer, was a doctor. Walter is well known because when President Abraham Lincoln died, he gave the scriptures at his funeral, which was a big thing at the time.
Okay, so now let's take Phoebe into Hamilton. And let's start with that prayer meeting that would have begun in this great city, which was a lot smaller then, but still very significant. What happened?
They had just finished a camp meeting out in Oakville, and they were going to go home by the Albany boat that left in Hamilton to New York, where they lived. And they were taking the train from Oakville to Hamilton, and something happened where they couldn't make their connection to the Albany boat, so their ship sailed without them. The ministers heard that they were in town, and they were like, great, we know the Palmers, we love them. It's the night of our prayer meeting. Let's ask all three Wesleyan Methodist churches to join together for prayer and ask the Palmers to lead it. So they did, and Phoebe was not even the main speaker. She was just the afterthought afterwards to give the challenge, because women weren't really allowed to take a main role at that time. But while she was walking to the church from where the ministers had their tea, she had heard God say to her that if the people gave a tithe of their time, their talent, and their estate, that she would be instrumental in leading a revival. So that night, after the main speaker spoke, her husband closed off with the prayer, and she stood up and gave a unemotional challenge to the people and just said, guys, I really feel God saying to us that if we give of ourselves and we just evangelize, that I am going to bring a revival here. 65 people were present from 500 people that included in the three churches. 35 people raised their right hand in solemn pledge to say that they were going to do the work of evangelism. Phoebe goes home, and everyone goes home that night, but Phoebe goes to bed and she hears God saying that this is not it, that they need to stay because God is going to do something great. So they planned the meeting for the next day, and they got to the church, and hundreds of people were outside the church doors. 21 people came Christians that night. And Phoebe said, yeah, this is an evidence that God is moving. So they stayed on for another 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, they had about 500 people who came to Christ, and they were holding meetings every day. And this was not led by Phoebe Palmer. Let me emphasize the fact that it was everyday Christians going out and saying, do you know about Christ? And people on the streets were like, people have been coming up to me all day and saying the same thing. I must be a sinner. I need to get right with Christ.
Okay, I want to bring in Adam and Renee here because we've been learning every day about different histories that have been going on. And so that really is the genesis of the Great Awakening, which is famous in our history books. And it's right beginning just, not far from where our studios are at Crossroads. Any thoughts for our historian, Sandra King?
In the current times, have there been any current awakenings?
It's hard to say. I think it's easier to start a revival, but awakening, like I said, is a larger mass movement. I know in history they've documented 3 Great Awakenings. This one was a 2nd Great Awakening. Anything apart from that, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Do we know much about the evangelists who answered that call of Phoebe, or were they just, all that's known of them is that they just answered the call and started spreading the word?
They just came and they heard the voice of God during the meeting. And it was the Christians that were in the church that got out of their pews and started doing the evangelism. What we do know about Phoebe and Walter is that they started missions. They encouraged women to preach. They started orphanages. They did different things like that.
Are we poised to pray for a 4th Great Awakening? Can we?
I would hope so. I believe that revival can come at any time and an awakening can come at any time, but we just have to be listening to God and doing what he says. And I think the biggest hindrance we have today is that we are scared of evangelism because we don't know how to do it in today's society. I don't have any answers for that, but I just know that if we want to see that come, we need to start addressing that in the churches.